Okay, well, maybe I will just for sake of time, I will get started and then people can sort of trickle in as we go. Welcome everyone to our May webinar. My name is Michelle Meckelberg and I am a board member of CASCMA. I also am a practicing veterinarian at the Edmonton Humane Society in Alberta. And we're pleased to have Dr. Kate Allison-Black join us today. I will let her do the introduction, but a high view of our topic today is sort of practical approaches for managing highly pathogenic avian influenza in shelter and high volume spay neuter environments, sort of paying a particular attention to our feral cat colony outreach. So I will let Dr. Kate take it away. And just for some housekeeping, we can put any questions that you have in the chat function, and I will be keeping an eye on that and bring them to Kate's attention and potentially answer them throughout or save them to the end. So we're going to be a bit fluid here. So thank you again, Kate, and it's all yours. Thank you.
Hi, I really appreciate the chance to do this today. Uh, Zoonotic disease and in particular outreach to the community is incredibly important to me. And so getting a chance to discuss this, especially with shelter medicine people, is very important. So I am a small animal vet. I started out doing equine and small animal, did emergency medicine for a while, shelter medicine, and I'm back in GP at this point. But I do like to do a lot of lecturing on zoonotic disease in particular. Um, first became interested in highly pathogenic avian influenza about 3 years or so ago when I realized the gap that we had in public access to veterinarians with the backyard poultry folks. And so I started collecting data at that point. And then when the mammals started testing positive, in particular the cats, I realized that there was a huge potential inflection point uh, in small animal practice, in particular with shelters and the feral cat programs. And so I felt like it was kind of incumbent on somebody to speak about this. And so that's where we are today. So mitigation in shelters, how to avoid the fuss or cluck. And trust me, I really practice saying that so I wouldn't mess it up. All right, so avian flu is a hot topic right now. We are concerned with egg prices, culling chickens. That becomes incredibly political because people are wondering if we're headed towards another pandemic. But it's more that we're worried about a pandemic. If we think about the development of a pandemic, we think about the fact that you start with your disease in animals, and then does it become reliably transmissible to humans? Once it's reliably transmissible to humans, that's one step. The final step is it reliably transmissible between humans? And so we are somewhere in that reliably transmissible to humans, but haven't really made that leap to human reliable transmission that we know of. So we're still very much monitoring for that. So order of go, just a brief discussion of HPAI and then the current status in North America. We're going to talk about shelter types and risks among those shelters, and then how to deal with SOPs, facility flow, patient testing protocols specific to Canada, and then discuss feral cat colony outreach management with that, and then also discuss how to personalize your SOPs using AI. There will be information, documents and whatnot that I have on my Substack, and that will be shared later. So what is highly pathogenic avian flu? It's an influenza A. And remember that, influenza A, that's important. So right now we're thinking about the H5N1. That's the special one that's running around. It's the 2.3.4.4B, not A. A was previous, this is B. So in the mid-90s, you had the outbreak in China, and then reemerging in the early 2020, 2021 here in North America. Around 2022 or so, that's when they started seeing more of the die-off of sea mammals, not just around here, but all over. And that's when we realized there may be more of an endemic issue than we thought. So it is an orthomyxovirus, RNA virus, and it's enveloped. So why does the enveloped virus thing, why is that important? It's important because even though it sounds like an envelope virus is protected by this envelope, it's all very difficult to destroy. That's actually the opposite. So envelope virus means that it's very easy to destroy. So it does mean that your routine disinfectants will be effective. So that's good news, right? The other is that it's a flu A. And why is that important? That's important because most of our respiratory PCR panels include a pan flu A PCR. So you can at least rule out H5N1 with that pan flu A test. We'll talk about that later. All right, so key virology concepts. I'm going to just touch on this briefly. Just the H is the hemagglutinin in neuraminidase. So here we've got the H5N1. The big thing here that I want you to think about, though, is the difference between antigenic drift, so the slow change, versus the antigenic shift, or the ka-chunk, the change that happens when you have species like pigs or cats that are mixing vats, or ferrets, mustelids. Those are that's when we have more of an issue, is that sudden change, that sudden reassortment, the ability for a cat or a ferret to get a human flu A and H5N1 at the same time, and then have a reassortment occur and make it very advantageous for humans to be able to get this from other humans. At this time, the genotypes of concern are going to be the B3.13 and then the B1.1. So it would seem that the D1.1 would be for dairy, but no, it's the opposite. The B3.13 is associated with dairy cows. And this is the one that when the people are getting it, humans, it's usually confined to the upper respiratory. So eyes are a little bit red, runny nose, basically less virulent. Still quite virulent in cats, though. So you think about the cats that were at the dairy, they're dropping dead. Then you have the D1.1. That's more associated with poultry. And that's the one that's going to be more virulent in humans. That's the kid in British Columbia that was hospitalized, the man in Louisiana who died. There's a woman in Wyoming that was hospitalized, kid in Mexico that just died. And there was another child in India. I don't have the subtyping on that, but I have suspicions that it was probably this, just because the kid ate raw poultry and that's how they became ill. Again, this one is also very virulent in felines. So what makes it highly pathogenic? It's just the function of it. It makes them very, very sick, makes the birds very, very sick. It's not that it's highly pathogenic to humans or to cows. I mean, to cats, arguably. Causes rapid systemic illness and rapid death. So you're looking at enters a breeder house within 4 days, dead, which is why they do the depopulation, because they don't really want to watch them suffer. But now we have the issue where there are more mammals that are being affected. So transmission pathways, initially, it's a wild bird migration, poultry trade, all those poultry shows. Then secondary would be contaminated feeds, fomites. You've got the story of the dairy workers whose cats got sick and died, and the cats never had contact with the cows. The workers were never tested, but they did have clothes that came home from the dairy. So we're unsure about how those cats became ill and died. If it was from the workers or from the clothes, but clearly fomites can be an issue. And then tertiary, this is where we're getting into the concern with mammal to mammal, mammal to human, another mammal transmission, especially with the reassortment animals such as pigs and cats. They did do a study recently where they took the respiratory secretions from a human that had been infected via dairy cows, and they infected ferrets, and they found that the ferrets easily transmitted it to other ferrets via aerosolization. So that's fun and scary all at the same time. All right, so the current status, and I'm not sure the picture will show up well, but I feel like it's kind of a dumpster fire. Timeline. So again, we had the early on the 1996 when we first started seeing it. Now, 2021, wild birds showing up with it. We start to see the first human case, Colorado. That was our first human case in North America. That was Colorado. That was poultry. So then we start seeing more of a spillover into mammals and the cow to human transmission. And you get the story about the dairies where the cows are sick, not usually so sick that they're dying, not like the birds are. Their milk is off. It's gross looking. They're not feeling so good. The vet goes out and they're dead birds. The cats are dying. The cats aren't coming up to the rigs. And that's when we start getting the positive testing because the vets were smart and they looked for it. So geographic hotspots. Right now in the US, Arizona, Idaho, California, and those are mostly dairy. So species affected of the avians, basically all of them. We just had an outbreak this winter in Gettysburg where I live. Gettysburg College is about 2 miles from my house and they had dead birds. Fortunately, there were no other animals testing positive. There are a number of feral cats on campus and they ended up being okay as far as we know. I didn't hear any reports of anyone that were dead, although I'm not sure that we necessarily would have. And there were no outbreaks in any of the commercial populations, nor in the backyard flocks in our area. So I feel like we're fairly lucky on that end. So mammals affected. Those are the ones we're starting to see more and more of. And so I'm thinking, gee whiz, gosh, there's another one that's affected. So dairy cows, again, outbreak. In addition to dairy cows, we know that beef cows have to be affected as well. They have to be. We're just not going to be checking them or seeing it quite as readily. Then cats, obviously, especially the farm cats, outdoor cats, and those cats that are fed raw foods. Dogs, in general, dogs are really not going to be as big of a risk, or at as big of a risk. They will test positive, particularly dogs that get into the waterfowl, so the hunting dogs and things like that, dogs that would be consuming raw foods. There was a shelter dog in Canada a while back that did die from bird flu. Then wild mammals, so all sorts of wild mammals all across the board, grizzly bears, dolphins, sea lions, foxes, all that. And then in the zoos, they're having outbreaks as well. So we have anything from large apex predators to exotic birds. Let's see. Oh, it didn't work. I love this. So, and you can see how that would definitely lend itself to passing avian flu. You know, the goose ends up in the tiger pen and then boom, you get what you get. So down to surveillance and reporting gaps. There are plenty right now, especially in the US. It's kind of incumbent right now on our states in the US to make sure that we're keeping up with reporting. So with gaps, we do have gaps in routine testing. In Gettysburg, when we had our outbreak, there was also a flu A outbreak in humans. And so everybody who tested positive for flu A, there was a reflex test for H5N1 as well. And because the hospitals aren't able to test directly, they're having to rely on the public health labs. We are concerned about underreporting, obviously. There was the study that came out about the vets in the US. The most concerning would be that the practitioner that tested positive or had the seroconversion without any known exposure. And this is one that I'm wondering, again, maybe was beef cattle, just because the dairy cows would probably appear sick, whereas the beef cattle might not be so obviously ill. So risk assessment for shelters by facility type. Your dog and cat shelters, these are going to be more of a moderate risk. So this is just down to the fact that dogs are going to be less likely to pick up avian flu and less likely to get particularly sick from it. If you're not housing birds and wild mammals along with the dogs and cats, again, you're decreasing the risk. You will increase the risk if they do have access to wildlife or rodents. So if you don't have a way to prevent that from happening, if you don't have closed off kennels, if you don't have good rodent protection, you're going to have an issue. You must not feed raw food, and that includes freeze-dried treats, which we think of as being safe, but no, freeze drying does not eliminate this virus. So don't use those either. You're going to have to talk to your behavior folks about that, because that seems to be a very favored kind of training treat. Then another risk factor that can, another factor that can increase the risk is the feral cat program. So if you have a lot of feral cats coming in and out, that obviously would increase your risk, particularly if you have an outbreak in your area. So the highest risk would be when you have a mixed species, especially with wildlife, particularly if you have mixed species with poultry and wildlife and cats and ferrets and so forth. So the more species you add, the more species that have a potential for bringing it in. So from the outside, living outside in endemic areas, you're going to have more of an issue with, or more, your risk will increase from that. In these cases, you're going to want to have far more strict biosecurity than you would for a dog and cat shelter. You'll still want to have it for the dog and cat shelter, particularly, again, if you have a good feral cat program, but it's really going to need to be super stringent if you have wildlife. As far as facility layout and flow, don't cross the streams. So you want designated areas for your feral cats, for your shelter animals, and for community pets with clear signage. So you don't want to have crossover. Have a quarantine. Anything that's sick, you want to isolate. Anything coming in new, you want to quarantine. If you have something that is sick, you quarantine it. If you have something that was housed with something that is sick, I would suggest a separate quarantine, like a isolation light for that one, and to watch it if it's got respiratory signs, just to be on the safe side. And then one-way movement. If they go into isolation, they shouldn't go into quarantine. They should move from isolation into your well wards. So the other thing to think about is who is coming into these places. If you have suspects for avian flu, or really anything zoonotic, you're going to want to severely limit who has access. I would say no volunteers at all. And I would probably limit the staff and the shelter that comes in contact to those that have the most training, and have the most ability to adhere to strict PPE. You want to have good signs, both with words and pictographs. We want to be fully aware that everybody needs to be able to spot this and to read it, no matter what language they read or speak. All right, on to personal hygiene and PPE. So keeping it clean, washing hands, mandatory. You want to have the alcohol sanitizers around, but don't rely on them. Don't do that. It's might as well spit in your hand sometimes. If there's mucus, if there's other stuff on there, it takes a long time for that alcohol to do much of anything. So hand washing is really best. If you're in your isolation ward, you're going to have gloves on. Just wash your gloves rather than doffing your gloves and donning them again, because you're supposed to be in full PPE. So just wash your gloved hands, and that's going to save your skin, save the environment by not having to use new gloves constantly, and decrease the chances of doffing and donning gloves within isolation. So dressing to impress. Putting on the PPE is one thing. The really important part is taking it off. And I do have a handout on this, and it's at this website. But more importantly, there'll be a link to it on my Substack, and you'll get a link to that as well. You want to be very careful about the order in which you do it, because that's going to determine whether or not you leave active virus on your body as you leave isolation. I would also suggest, if you have concerns about zoonotic disease or something you don't want to take home, that you have clinic-only scrubs and footwear. Even if you have foot baths, clinic-only scrubs and footwear is a very good idea. The other is how you're going to record your visits to isolation. You can use wipeable tablets, something that you could like dry erase, wipe them off clean. My personal preference is an AI scribe. That's what I use in the hospital. So I like that because I can have my PPE on, I can turn on the AI scribe, put it in my pocket, then I don't do anything with it. I just go through my exam. I can run multiple patient exams on that one recording. I say the patient's name, name, rank, serial number, all that. And then I do my exam. And at the end, I doff my stuff, and then I can stop my scribe and then go forward. It makes the SOP for each individual animal. Some AI scribes will work and directly interact with your PIMS, which is great. Others you have to import in, but that's no problem. You still have eliminated the chance for taking out a pen and writing on paper and taking that paper out, or clipboards and things like that. You've eliminated one more pathway of potential infection. So if you don't have a scribe, that's okay. You can still record your visit, and you can still create a transcript, and then you can upload it to ChatGPT, and you can format that into a SOAP too. So you don't have to have an AI scribe to be able to do this. Cleaning and disinfecting protocols. So most people have standard, have SOPs at their shelters. If you don't, it's not hard to make them, and there are a lot of resources for that. These clearly defined methods of doing things make sure that when you have a position, if somebody leaves that position, somebody else can come in and do that job the same way every time. And if you come up with a way to decrease the chances of transmitting disease from ward to ward, or from animal to human, human to animal, you want to keep those key points in place, and SOPs make that possible. Among equipment, just like with keeping the animals separated, you're going to want to keep your equipment separated, if at all possible. This decreases the fomite transmission, or transmission via fomite. Not always possible. Anesthesia machines leap to the top of my mind, because some places, especially those that have a wildlife program, they will have anesthesia machines that sometimes they will use to box down, gas down birds or whatever, to do an initial assessment on them. And so you have to have a plan in place for dealing with that. Radiology. So like some of these will be respiratory cases. You may want to take them to radiology. Luckily, the ones you're going to be most concerned about are going to be small. You're going to be able to fit them into a kennel, cover the kennel, take them into radiology, take them back out. Have a plan in place for your pathway through your clinic as well. And think about how you're going to most quickly get them in and quickly get them out. But that cover on the kennel is a fantastic way to eliminate some of the risk. So as far as patient management, you're going to want to categorize and strategize. You're going to want to separate out your feral cat surgery days from your shelter procedures, public procedures. Some places do this via time, some places do it via day. We always did it via day, and I found that very helpful. And then ID and isolate. So anything that's sick, you're going to isolate. You're already doing this. It just means you're going to have to be extra on top of it. And you're going to need to, as soon as you have suspicion, you're going to want to tell your CFI. So now hitting the find out stage. you're going to want to set up a plan now for the ante and postmortem testing. And if you do have a suspicion, again, you're going to want to contact your local office for any suspects. That's required by law. Now, you're not required by law to test cats, but you are required to report suspects. Anything that dies suddenly, so just drops dead and you don't know why, like they're kind of have a fever and all of a sudden they're dead, or they're neurologic and then they're dead, or you euthanize them, those are the ones that you're going to want to go ahead and talk to your province about rabies testing. And they are supposed to go ahead and retain tissues for dual testing, but it's not a bad idea to go ahead and get a dual test. So go ahead and get swabs before you send them off, just in case. All right, so who pays? The client does. So if this is a private client, the owner would pay. It's discretionary again, so it's not required, but there are programs for wildlife. All right, or sorry, for wildlife and for ferals. All right, so our pathway here, so you have a clinical suspicion, you're going to contact CFIA, you're going to get your samples. So antemortem samples would be conjunctival swabs, nose swabs, back of the throat. You're going to want to use a non-organic swab. You're going to want to use the viral transport medium. If you don't have that, a red top tube or a plain tube with a little bit of sterile saline in it is great. I use the swab from the bacterial culturette, throw the tube away, and then just use a sterile tube with sterile saline in it, and that seems to work fine. But if you have any questions, just call the lab you're going to use. All right, then you submit to your lab, which we'll get to the various labs you guys have. And then if the lab shows that if there's a suspicion of H5N1, so they test positive on the flu A PCR, then they go down a separate pathway for confirmation. All right, where and what to submit. So in Canada, we have several different options. The Animal Health Lab, they only do the flu A PCR. They don't do the full respiratory PCR. IDEXX does, but I don't think that they have the H5N1, but they would forward the H5N1 on if the flu A is positive. Antec can test for H5N1. They do send tests off to Cornell. If they send it off across the border to Cornell, then it can't be subtyped in Canada because they can't send it back over. So that would be like a dual test sample situation. And then again, going back to sample guidelines, use the synthetic swabs. If you do have an animal that is deceased, go ahead and get lung tissue as well. So what's important here, and seems to be a big difference between Canada and the US, is that avian influenza is reportable in all animals in Canada. This was emphasized to me when I contacted CFIA. And so this is something that they really wanted me to emphasize. They can do the confirmatory testing at the National Center for Foreign Animal Disease. So they'll handle it on that end. And the labs that you initially send things to should be forwarding all information on to them. That's part of what they do. But again, you'll be talking to them before you send any samples in anyway, because that's going to be your first step. So testing choices, are we going to go for a full respiratory PCR or just the pan-influenza A? I personally like the full respiratory PCR just because I'm looking for more than just flu A. I had 2 different households earlier this year that had multiple cats very, very sick. One of them had a cat that just dropped dead after respiratory illness. And so I did or I did the full respiratory PCR, and each house had a different combination of respiratory diseases. Thank goodness none of them were influenza A. But it was very helpful to have all that information because this is not the only disease of concern. I use Cornell just because I'm in the US, it's easy to do and it's inexpensive for me. All right, so anything that would be a mammal neuro case, go ahead and contact your chief veterinary office and see what they want to do. I mean, I don't know if you guys can submit the whole body, if you have to just submit the head, but do that. They should retain some tissue for testing though. Let them know that H5N1 could be a differential diagnosis. It probably is already on their radar as such though. All right, so important contacts. The Ontario Animal Health Network has a feral cat project, and I'll get into that in just a sec. Then the CFIA, Animal Health Laboratory, Canadian Animal Health Surveillance System, and Animal Health Canada. These are all excellent resources. I will have links to them on my Substack if you don't already have them in your link list. So there is a pilot project for avian influenza surveillance in cats, and shelter cats should qualify for this. I did read that they will do a limited number of owned animals if the clients will sign something about that, saying that it's okay. But there's not a rapid turnover, so it's not for an emergency type situation. This is again more for surveillance than for identifying a disease in a specific patient. So cats only. So this is not dogs, this is just cats. These need to be acute signs, fewer than 10 days. It could be just dead cats in a feral cat colony, free roaming cats, unowned cats, again, asterisk on that. And they can't be rabies suspects. So they can't have had neuro issues or neuro and contacted a human where you're worried about transmission. All right, so on to public and staff education. We just went through a pandemic that resulted in a large subset of the population losing trust and faith in our public health system. And I'm speaking as a US citizen, and it was pretty ugly here. I'm not sure how bad it was in Canada. But now is the time that we need to start speaking about this and the risks in humans before it gets to that point. It's very important. We're already having pushback with the backyard chicken people. And we need to jump on top of this with our small animals before it becomes an issue with them. And so with that, we need to start with our volunteers, our staff, and our feral cat people. They're going to be frontliners in this situation, particularly because the cats are so susceptible. You're going to want to tailor your education to your audience. So when you are making your outreaches, you need to think about who you're talking to, their education level, their languages, their culture, that kind of thing. I helped craft a outreach program for the Amish farmers. And so I set the reading level at 8th grade, patriarchal, use Bible verses, and came out with something tailored for them. So feral cat people, they're empathetic. They have their own cats. They're concerned. They want to take care of these cats. You want to include those kind of things when you're thinking about tailoring your education for them. Speaking of which, feral cat colonies. I consider them to be the canary in the coal mine. Unlike my dog, he's a barky idiot. So again, start the education now. We're not in a crisis point, not yet. We need to have a plan in place now, because a plan in place shows that we are crafting a response. We're not going to be reactive. This is a response. So now is the time to talk to these people about how they're going to watch their colony for their health, what to look for, what to do, what not to do, ways that they can take care of their colony and keep them safest, which is what they want to do. So first off, we need to be monitoring the colony and uh, dealing with wildlife control, which is not easy. So if you want to monitor the colony, think about trail cameras. I know that a lot of spay and neuter outreach programs utilize trail cameras to figure out where to put traps and whether or not their programs are being effective. So utilize those. Think about changes in food intake, what the animals look like. So they're going to want to keep an eye on them, and they do already. A lot of them will have names for their ferals. And then they need to feel very comfortable coming to the vet staff and saying, hey, I'm seeing a change. And that's why we're doing this ahead of time, because they need to know ahead of time, this is the plan, this is why we're doing it. So it's not a reactive thing, it's a response. As far as dealing with pests, we know that rodents can also transmit H5N1. So we need to be sure that our food supplies are kept safe from rodents. We need to deter any wildlife that we can around areas where our feral cats are. So trash removal, no dumping, remove standing water, that kind of thing. If you have people that have chickens, ducks, and things like that, if you can talk to them about making sure that they're staying in their own place. A lot of people don't want their chickens coming out of their yard anyway, but it's a good idea to try to decrease the chances for these cats in as much as possible from coming into contact with extra risks. So this brings us to the AI SOP, or AI SOPs. And part of what I've done with those is to not only create SOPs, but I've created some outreach documents that are going to be available as well. But I highly encourage everybody to learn how to do this on their own. It's much better, much more effective, and frankly, it gives you a much better grasp on all of the information. So when you're building an SOP, if you haven't done it already, there are generic SOPs that you can go through, and then you can put your shelter information in. Maddie's Fund has this available. ASPCA Pro has some other lists. And then there's this handy dandy guideline for standards of care that you can use as well. I found out by accident that you can use ChatGPT to build your own GPT. And I made something called Safe Pause Protocol, which is a GPT specifically for shelter vets to create their own SOPs. It's pretty easy to use. I'll go over it later. All right, so your AI assisted SOPs. Advantages, you basically outsource the grunt work. It's really easy, rapid turnaround, super easy to update. As soon as you get new information, you just upload that, rejigger your SOP, and you're good to go. It's much more simple than having to go through, rewrite, reformat, all of that. It's just much more simple. Disadvantages, you have to pick the best sources. You can't just ask ChatGPT to do it for you. You have to put in the source material. If you do that, you're going to decrease the chances for AI to have these hallucinations. AI doesn't always prioritize things the way you or I would. So you have to be sure you know how to prioritize them and to go in and change things around. And you can do that within the prompts as well, but it's good to know that. And as such, with all of this, the user doing this has to be at the expert level, because you have to be the one that pulls the information. You have to choose what information you're going to put in, what you value. You have to prioritize it. You have to be able to understand all of the information and put it all together. So a non-credentialed technician would not be a good choice, or a credentialed technician probably would be okay, but better would be a veterinarian. So with ChatGPT, even on the free version, and I'm just going to do ChatGPT because that's what I use and that's what I'm familiar with. So you can create and upload a source document with citations and bullet points, which is how I do it. And then once I've done that, I upload an existing SOP or generic SOP, and then you create a prompt and you can generate an output, and then you just edit the output. When I create the document with my source document, I do my own research. I mean, that's an overused term at this point, but I literally look up whatever I'm working on. I put in my citation, I read the whole thing, I pull out bullet points, and that's how I create my source for my information. I don't rely on AI to pull my sources and pull my information for me. That's a really important thing to remember with this. So here's what the window looks like. You can see there's a line for your prompt, and then the plus symbol is where you can upload your files, and you can upload pictures in the higher version or the paid version of ChatGPT. You can upload PDFs as well. If you are not using the paid version, you would have to cut and paste the actual text from your document, which is something you can do as well. And then you can also do a voice prompt. So you can do a stream of conscience voice prompt, and it'll oftentimes come up with something fairly decent. You'll have to edit, but it's better than nothing. So here's an example of a prompt that I wrote discussing or trying to come up with uh, an SAP for feral cat colonies. And so you can see that I put in the audience and how I want it written with the tone and level of reading. Um, and some important things that I wanted to talk about. You'll have to trust me that I would have uploaded my entire data dump on avian flu and cats and feral cats and all of that already, because that's where I'm going to get my information from, and that's how it's going to build the SOP. I didn't actually run this one because I already have one that I made. I just thought I would give you guys a generic prompt. All right, so on to Safe Pause protocol. This is what the landing page looks like, and it's not a paid thing, but you do have to have the upgraded version of ChatGPT to be able to use it. It's really pretty easy. I uploaded a bunch of articles and continue to upload them as I get new information, and uploaded some SOPs that I'd already created. And then the user can upload their current shelter SOPs, and then the GPT will update your SOPs to reflect the information about H5N1. So it will roll that into it as far as the testing protocols and everything. The GPT can also interview you. If you don't have all of that, it will interview you and help you build an SOP. So helpful links, don't worry about taking this down. I do have these available on my Substack, as well as pre-made documents. So I've got the feral cat colonies and bird flu, handout for feral cat colonies and caretakers, monitoring mitigation, and then the feral cat colony triage and treatment. I also have a Canadian specific version with all the information as far as where you need to send your testing, who you need to talk to. All right, and looks like I'm okay for time as far as questions. I guess I kind of blew through that, huh?